Thank you everyone for joining here today for our webinar speaking to what are different ways in which we can maximize the value of first-party data. Real quick, just some general housekeeping, who we are, who I am. We as an organization are InfoTrust. We are a privacy-centric digital analytics solutions company. We are Google partners. We work with many of you all on this call for topics ranging from Google Analytics to tag management to privacy and data strategy. Myself, my name is Lucas. I am our global head of privacy strategy. So I work with global organizations on topics such as this. How do we maximize the value of our first-party data? How do we do more with less, considering the privacy headwinds and the challenges that we're facing here as an industry kind of moving forward? So hopefully today we can cover a lot of those topics and really answer any questions and really feed into some of the strategies that you all are considering and working on. So oftentimes we get asked the question, I think everyone asks the question, what is the most important thing to succeed in the cookieless future? Type that into Google, read any kind of an opinion article, and ad nauseum, we hear first-party data. First-party data is super important. First-party data is the most important thing in order to be able to be successful, that we really need to focus on. And while that is true, that is not revelatory, really, in any way. What we need to kind of really take a step back and think about is that question of why. Why is it that first-party data is so important moving forward? And then what are the ways in which we can attract more value from that? Now, oftentimes when we try to answer this question of why, I think a lot of people focus on, well, it's the only thing that's available, or it is the closest we can be to our consumers, and that's how we can get that kind of full view of our consumers. I like to think about it a little bit differently and take it more from the concept standpoint and take a look back at what are the things that we've been able to rely on for analytics, for advertising, for targeting over the last 20 years, and what is it that's kind of fundamentally shifting here that leaves us with first-party data. So if we think about it from that perspective, and we think about going to a website, me as a user, Lucas, I go to the AccuWeather website, looking up the weather in Barcelona. And when that happens, ads are shown to me. And the technology that's responsible for showing those ads is also collecting information about the ad that I viewed, the page that I'm on. And traditionally, an identifier associated with me and my device would be stored as a third-party cookie. And so what happens is that cookie persists on my browser, and I can go from page to page, and ad tech companies are constantly collecting, at minimum, what page it is that me, Lucas, ID, AB357, yada, yada, what pages I'm visiting. So if we think about this in kind of a broader context for those ad tech companies, and if we use the example of Google, who I know everyone is pretty heavily reliant on for a number of different advertising use cases. And we get to the concept of cookie match tables, which are a lot of fun. So for Google, me as a user, Lucas goes to AccuWeather.com/Barcelona, and I'm shown an ad. Well, Google has some of that ad technology responsible for displaying that ad. And so they're able to collect that cookie ID, and then that particular user associated with that ID was on that weather website and had that impression event. I then go to an advertiser's website, say Patagonia, and I'm viewing a particular product. That website very likely has Google technology on there where it's able to collect, again, that cookie ID as well as information about that page. This happens again when I go to Google and I actually search whatever it is that I'm searching on Google. I go to another content website or another publisher's website. I'm shown ads. I have that impression data. I go back to the Patagonia websites. I'm adding something to a cart. And then ultimately, I'm going to Delta and I'm looking for flights for a holiday. Google, or the ad tech company, traditionally, because of that third-party cookie being persistent across all of those different websites is able to have a very good view on my behavior. And so this information is able to be used for targeting purposes, for profiling purposes, and you can get really granular with the individual. You can become very predictive in what it is that that individual is going to be interested in, or is going to be effective for what ads to show them, as well as the value of impressions that are being shown there. Now, contrast this, a third party, the information that a third party is able to have, with the information that would be available in the same context for the advertiser, for Patagonia in this case. Patagonia has visibility into the actions that I'm taking across their website. So they can see that I'm viewing a product, that I'm adding a particular product to the cart. And they maybe have a little bit of visibility through some of the linkages and some of the tooling that's available to get insights about what are their consumers searching for on Google. How is it that they're coming to their website? But if we contrast this with the information that Google has, our first-party data isn't as robust. Third parties are able to actually have an advantage in terms of the profiling, the targeting, the information, and the understanding of consumers across the web, simply as a result of the nature of the industry, the nature of the technology, and the information that they have access to. So anyone would be able to, go to a Google, pay the money, and be able to leverage the same types of tools and the same level of insights that anyone else would. It doesn't matter if I have more first-party data than somebody else, because I have a backup, I have a third party that I can go to in order to be able to be effective. Now, we move into this cookieless future where those third-party cookies are gone. And so what gets blacked out here are those IDs. And so what Google then, or any ad tech, has access to is a disunified kind of look at different actions or activities that are happening. And so they may know all these different websites or these pages are being accessed, these ads are being viewed, but there is no key value with which to associate that back to an individual to fuel that targeting, to fuel that profiling. So from Google's perspective now, they have full visibility into what it is that people are searching or how people are behaving on their owned properties. And they maybe have a little bit of visibility into advertisers because advertisers are choosing to send some of that data to them, for example, in the context of like a Google Analytics. But it's a little bit more limited because we have things like consents and individuals able to opt out of sharing with various different partners. Now contrast this scenario with the position that advertisers are in today, where you have full visibility into the actions that are being taken across your website, who your consumers are, how they're interacting with your brand, and you still have that slight insight or view into how they're behaving on other websites due to various different integrations that you might have. So we're now in a position where advertisers, with the first-party data, you actually have more than that which is available to ad tech providers or third parties that you may be working with. And so this is where you can actually really develop a competitive moat using that first-party data that you have. In the past, it was great. It was more of a supplement. It was, wonderful. But how much competitive advantage could you really get when truly the third-party partners were the ones that had the larger proliferation of data and the deeper insights and understanding about those consumers? And so in this new world, we shouldn't be thinking about, hey, first-party data is just all that I have left. Oh no, it really becomes a competitive advantage and a competitive opportunity. So advantage is going to be realized by those organizations that are able to get the most from the first-party data that they have, and they're able to get more than their competitors because everyone's not on an equal footing. Everyone doesn't have that fallback option to be able to rely on third-party data and to be able to fully rely on the advertising technology stack that you're working with. So the question now becomes, how can we attain that competitive advantage? And that's what I want to really dive into here today. A little bit more at a high level, 5 different concepts and different things that you can think about that can really build up in order to be able to realize the most value possible from the first party data that's available to you. So if we, to start, for those 5 different items, the first one is obviously we need to optimize collection. We need to be able to collect as much as we possibly can in order to be able to really drive those insights and drive those actions. So what are some ways that we can focus on? And the first thing for optimizing collection is really thinking about and optimizing the privacy experience. So often when talking with marketing team members, they talk about the consent experience or consent banner as that's something we have to have. That's something that compliance is pushing on us. And there's not a whole lot of thought that goes into how can we optimize this? How can we use this to our advantage? I always like to call out this statistic. A really good study was done by Google and Ipsos at the beginning part of this year. It's this Privacy by Design, the benefits of putting people in control study. And one of the primary takeaways is that first statistic there. After a positive privacy experience with their second choice brand, 49% of people said that they would switch from their preferred brand to that second choice. 49%. So we talk about, or we think about how much money you're spending in brand equity, in building that branding and building that relationship with consumers. And this privacy experience and optimizing that privacy experience is oftentimes being left on the table. Now, the shortcut that a lot of marketers then think is like, okay, well, let's incentivize consent. If we incentivize consent, then more individuals will consent, we can collect more data, we have more value there that we can potentially extract. Also interesting in that study, there was actually a decrease. So there was a negative impact when additional monetary incentives were provided in exchange for consent or exchange for a privacy choice. So that shortcut is detrimental. I like to think about it this way. For the privacy experience, that is the first touch point for many of your consumers with any of your digital properties. Think about the amount of time, the amount of effort, the amount of investment that goes into various digital experiences, that goes into landing pages. A single landing page might be the first touch point for 5-10% of your user base. Privacy experience for 100% of your user base. And yet oftentimes it's considered an afterthought. This is one really key area that can be thought of and optimized in order to be able to optimize collection. Now, the next question becomes kind of how do we optimize the privacy experience? Number one, a lot of findings are finding that consumers want to feel in control, so provide them meaningful choice. The study that's cited here by Gartner, 79% of respondents agreed that they would like more control over the personal information that they give companies and the ways in which it is used. So providing meaningful choice is the first step to improving that privacy experience. Number two is being clear and transparent in exactly what's happening. Too often, just default cookie language is used. Ask someone that doesn't work in the industry what a cookie is. Ask 10 people, you're going to get 8 different answers. People don't understand what exactly a cookie is. All they know is that it's associated with those annoying pop-ups that show up on their screen. Be clear, be transparent. What is being collected? Why? How is it impacting them in order to be able to build that trust? And then number 3 here is be creative. Again, thinking about everyone just using defaults that come with your package CMP. If we can be more creative, if we can focus on how do we present this information in an understandable way, there's, again, massive opportunity for competitive advantage here. So that's the first point, improving the privacy experience. Now, once we improve that privacy experience, then yes, we still need to be able to collect that first-party data or interaction data or information from our consumers on those digital properties. Kind of the low-hanging fruit in doing this is focusing on that value exchange. What are more creative means in order to be able to collect more meaningful information from your consumers? So things like email capture, prioritizing that. because again, we do need some of that identity in order to be able to execute on some of the things we'll be talking about a little bit later. Things like subscriptions, loyalty programs, quizzes, and surveys. How can we deliver value to the consumer in such a way that they provide value back to us? Not only in the form of our macro conversions, but also micro conversions to be able to build that relationship. But remember, as it relates to more methods of collection, discounts should only be offered for actions and not for privacy, as we saw before. The third piece here for optimization of collection is focusing on a privacy-centric collection architecture. So often today, organizations approach data collection as just a binary choice. Either, yes, we have whatever type of consent is necessary in your area, or no, we don't. And so we either fire our tags, we either collect data, or we don't. It's an all or nothing. And with increasing proportions of individuals opting out of certain things in the United States, with a decreasing proportion of individuals that are opting in for consent to things like cookie usage in Europe, we're missing out, quite frankly, on a lot of potential data that we can compliantly collect and compliantly use that falls more in a gray area in between of collection and non-collection. Three things kind of that can help with there. Number one is restricted data processing. Many platforms are beginning to introduce functionality that are able to help you limit compliance risk while still maximizing the compliant data that you're able to collect. An example here would be for Facebook pixels and the limited data use option that is there. And at least for users in the United States, there is a data protection option that can be configured within the tags that are collecting data on a website for limited data use. What that will do is that provides a signal for Facebook, for Meta, to not process data collected from that individual, from those Facebook pixels, for other purposes. And so this limits that behavior for the sale and share of information in the US, but still allows for the ability to collect that information about just campaign effectiveness. And so for even some of those users that maybe opt out in something in California or Virginia or Colorado, we can still collect campaign performance information, which can allow for campaign optimization, but is not allowed to be processed for targeting of those consumers moving forward. So that's a way to kind of maintain and enhance some of that first-party data collection that is happening while also limiting that compliance risk. A second area that's very similar are concepts for anonymous data collection, the most notable example being consent mode. For example, with Google Analytics, you can implement the consent mode architecture, and that allows for what they call cookieless pings, which is just the collection of interaction data in the absence of any kind of a user identifier. So we can know that transactions happened or form downloads happened, but there's no way of associating that with the user, therefore, again, reducing that compliance risk. And then finally, when we think about that collection architecture, especially with server-side tag management, we're able to start introducing concepts in ways in which we can obfuscate data prior to sending it along to third parties. This opens up a ton of potential possibilities. With some organizations more recently, we've been having discussions in order to be able to, well, their concern is around VPPA, the Video Privacy Protection Act in the United States. And there are concerns with what type of video information, and can we collect things like a video title and pass that on to a third party, such as a Facebook or a Google. And in order to be able to reduce some of that risk, we can obfuscate information like a video title, or we can replace an explicit video title with an encoded value. And so that we can still understand what is the effectiveness of those campaigns, because we're passing along that information which we're allowed to do, which is a low risk to those third-party platforms, but we're stripping out the information that presents that potential compliance risk. And so those types of architectures are beginning to become possible. And this allows us to, again, optimize our first-party data collection while reducing some of that compliance risk. So in order to do this, though, for the obfuscation piece, and which is really critical here moving forward, we then get into the second principle here or the second way of maximizing that first-party data value, and that is for organizations to begin controlling their collection and distribution architecture. And this control of that collection architecture is what allows us to get to those principles for things like obfuscation, and even being able to supplement data as it's being collected. So we can get things like margin information going into analytics directly from, as well as more back-end data or offline data that's being able to supplement that which we're collecting online. So when we think about collection and that concept of control, traditionally, we've been in the situation where we have third-party tags, they're implemented on our website. So those are client-side JavaScript or scripts that are running on the site itself. And those are sending information directly to the platforms that we're working with. Some of that information that's being collected are things like IP address, which just has to be collected for how the internet works, as well as these tags have the ability to scrape or just automatically pull information from the front end of our website. And an example of this would be things like Facebook, and Facebook Pixel being cited last year in some studies for collecting or scraping some information directly from forms and setting that up with Facebook Pixel requests. Most notably, just because it was right about a year ago, there was an investigation by the Markup and The Verge that was looking at tax preparation websites. And it was identifying that some of those websites were sending up form entry data. So information like personal financial information, demographic data, how much money people were making, the amount of money that they were receiving in their return for their tax return for that year. All of that information was being sent to Facebook. Well, that presents a significant risk, not something that we want to be collecting. And that is just what happens when we don't collect or we don't control this collection architecture. So what we can now do is start to focus on an architecture for server-side tag management. And what this does is it changes the distribution method. So instead of the data being sent by tags directly from the website to those third-party platforms, instead, data is sent directly to our owned first-party server environment where information can be modified, it can be transformed, it can be obfuscated, and then from there, it is distributed on to our third parties. So we have complete control over that entire collection aspect, as well as the distribution or the disclosure to third parties. Now, at that middle point, we also are able to introduce this concept of data transformation. So I've already kind of alluded to some of the ways in which information can be obfuscated or removed. But a firm example here is take that data model on the left, where we have things like our transaction ID, IP address, email. Instead of that information being sent directly to Google Analytics or directly to Google Ads or directly to Facebook, or even just having the possibility of doing so, we instead send all of that data to our server-side instance. We're able to strip out our identifiers like our IP address and our email, and yet we're still able to send in things like our revenue, transactions, product IDs, campaign IDs for that which had brought the user to the website in that instance or for that session for attribution. So we can still use the data, send our first-party data to the third parties we're working with to power that campaign optimization, power targeting, but at the same time, we can reduce that compliance risk. Now, in the meantime, we can also start sending all of that data to our owned data warehouse, what we like to call a marketing data warehouse, as well as things like a customer data platform. And here, because we control this, we own this data warehouse, we own these servers, we are able to collect and aggregate all of our first-party data together in one particular place. So the utility here is, again, that we're able to advance or address use cases in some of these instances where certain data maybe can't be disclosed to those third parties, but we can still send that to our own cloud instance where we can then start to stand up our own solutions to accomplish internal use cases using that data. So it's another way that we extract more value from our first party data via the mechanisms that are in place for that architecture. So if we've done those first two things, so those first two ways that we can maximize the value of our first party data, we've optimized collection. So we have more trust with our consumers. We have better opt-in rates. We are able to be collecting more from those that are interacting with our owned properties. We're also controlling collection and distribution. And so we're reducing that compliance risk that comes with, a lot of these kind of privacy headwinds. We're also streaming that information to our own first-party owned data warehouse, where we can start to build out our own use cases using all of the data that's available to us. Now, the third principle here is a little bit of a shortcut, but it's really helpful to consider and expand our conception of first-party data. And what do I mean by this? So if you just Google the definition of first-party data, you can see a number of different definitions here. So Google is calling first-party data data that a company collects with consumers' consent and therefore owns. It comes from multiple online and offline sources. Lotame, saying that the information you collect directly from your audience or your customers. Shopify, data a company collects directly from its audience. So all this is more so speaking to the way in which data is collected. And that's how we often think about it. If we think about our data collection architecture at this point, so data being sent to our server-side instance, data then being sent from there to our third-party platforms, we always think about our first-party data as that which is going to analytics, because that's interaction data from our website. We always think about our first-party data as that which we're sending to our marketing data warehouse, because again, that's what's coming from our digital properties. But what about the data that's generated in the partner platforms that we're working with, in something like Google Ads, in something like Facebook? Information that's there is being collected from our audience. There are customers. The data is being generated from interactions, be those impressions or clicks, that we're paying for, that are actions that are happening from our users, but yet oftentimes we think of this as third-party data. It's not ours. We don't own it. And this is where I think we can really change that conception of first-party data and flip that around. Any data that is generated from your customers with your money in your MarTech platforms, that should be first-party data too. We can start to get a much better understanding of our consumers, of their actions, of their activities. We can layer in so many additional insights or make a lot of additional insights available to us if we start considering the data that's generated in our partner platforms to also be first-party data. And so once we start thinking about that and approaching it in that way, then we can start to ingest that information. We can pull in all the data that's available to us from things like our analytics platform, as we likely already are doing. We can do that from our ads platforms. We can do that from any activation platform that we're working with, and ingest all of that into that first-party owned marketing data warehouse. And that's where we can now have a really holistic sense and look at not only who are our consumers, how are they interacting as they go across the web, but also just what is the effectiveness of our marketing. We can do creative analysis. We can do channel analysis. We can do all types of various different analyses given the additional data that this really opens up for us. Now, it's easy to say this for ingestion and integration. It's very difficult to execute on, and that I do want to be very conscious of. And there are a number of different kind of challenges that are presented to organizations that want to take advantage of this, that want to do these things. And just a few call outs, high level, things that you're going to have to be able to do in order to be successful in this. Number one, and really to underscore everything, you need to define and enforce taxonomy standards across platforms. We talked about at the opening how third-party cookies going away means that we lose that, or ad tech, as well as us, I guess, we lose that key value with which we can associate actions of individuals across websites to the same person. Well, the same thing for any kind of integration, you're going to need key values. So even if we're wanting to do analysis for campaign performance or creative performance or performance of particular segments or audiences or audience characteristics, that data needs to be uniform across those platforms so that when we ingest that, we actually have something that is usable for us to be able to really try to derive insights from. So defining those taxonomy standards and then enforcing those is going to be really critical. Number two is that you need to define your use cases for architecture as well as for privacy design. Define your use cases up front. It's simply an academic exercise. If we talk about, yeah, we have data in all these places, let's integrate it together. We can do some really cool stuff with it. Yeah, we can, but unless you define exactly what it is that you're wanting to do with it up front, things like compliance, individuals that consent are consenting to that which they are being told at that particular point. And so if they're consenting to a particular use of their data, or particular data that's being collected, and then 4 months later, we decide, hey, we can integrate this data set with this other one, and then we can do these other cool things, the individuals have not consented to that processing activity or to that outcome or to that use case. And so you can't from a compliance lens. And so in order to be able to really approach this in the right way, we need to be upfront. We need to define those use cases. This is also what's going to really define the architecture, both for that collection, for the distribution, for the database architecture, that is going to be necessary to be able to pull all that data together and then get the most out of it. So define those use cases up front. And then finally, we need to execute, actually ingesting and integrating data from platforms. For many organizations, traditionally, this can be difficult, especially if you're working with a number of third-party agency partners that actually own the licenses to those platforms that you're working in, or maybe you don't have the contractual guarantees necessary for, again, with partners that you're working for, to be able to actually get at that data. So this is another thing to keep in mind up front. If you want to start ingesting data from all the different platforms that are available to you, from your DSP, from CDPs, from anything, you need to make sure that you have that access, you have that true ownership of that data, and you should own it. Again, it's your money that is responsible for the generation of that data. You should own it. You should be able to use it. So we've optimized collection. We're controlling collection and distribution. We've expanded that definition or our conception of first-party data, and we have it all integrated together. So now what can we do? Well, now we're in a position where we can actually start to generate the insights and take the actions that are going to confer that competitive advantage for our organization. So how do we extract better insights? First, on that same kind of idea of the integration, for extracting insights, we can get a lot of good insights from those digital data sources. We can integrate together behavioral data, our ads data, our information from activation platforms, and we can start to get really sophisticated in things like attribution and channel analysis and be much more efficient with how we spend our digital dollars. But this still leaves a lot on the table, especially as we're talking about our conception of first-party data. Your offline data is also that first-party data. And so if we can integrate those offline data sources together with those digital data sources, that's just another kind of stage, another step that we can get to. Now, I understand that this also is very, very difficult. Oftentimes, our data is always in silos, even just in a digital context, let alone our offline data. And also, offline data is often kind of owned, managed, controlled by established internal business intelligence teams. Those databases have been stood up years ago. There was no really kind of design decisions considering our digital counterparts. So that's where kind of another area to focus on here. Digital needs to be at the table for any of those architectural design decisions. It kind of updates moving forward, because it's really important to be able to integrate all these data sources together to extract better insights. Now, anyone that is familiar with InfoTrust loves that we love to use kind of a crawl, walk, run model for any kind of maturation of activities. And no different here when we're talking about means of extracting better insights from that first party data. So when we think about crawl stage, and this is still an area where if we've done the things right that we've already talked about, we can be a lot faster than most of our competitors who aren't even going to make it to the starting line, even if we are crawling here. And so what does it mean to be in that crawl phase? Where can we start? Well, if we've integrated all that data together, we have our first party data in our, in this case, in this example, BigQuery, in our owned marketing data warehouse. So what can we do with that? Well, we can run queries. We can start asking questions of that data. How are we performing today? What has happened in the past? How can we optimize based upon the learnings that we can take from those answers to the questions that we're asking of the data? So we can understand what has happened, and we can start really optimizing from there. Our walk phase is when we get into, again, using that kind of Google BigQuery example, getting into things like BigQuery BQML. With BQML, this is a solution within GCP where you have available models that analysts can run for insights that go beyond just surface level reporting. This is not, well, it's marketed as so easy that anyone can do it. But there is still an art here to being able to match the models that are available to the data set to the various different use case. So these are pre-created models. We can run this on things like our GA4 data. This type of a walk phase gets us to that next step where we're able to get more insight, both into what has happened, but we're also able to start using these models to predict what will happen. And so based upon all of that information that we have available to us, we can get into more predictive analytics and being able to make better decisions from there. Our run phase is when we get into things like AutoML, which it allows us to run those models on our full first-party data set. So we're not limited just to, say, the digital data. We're also including the offline information, some of those other data sources to also have those predictive models. And then we can begin using things such as Vertex AI, again, within the GCP environment, for building, training, deploying machine learning models, as well as AI applications. And so this gets us to that point where not only are we asking questions of the data, those questions are always being asked. We're all automatically, and we're automating that process of gathering those insights. And then we're also automating the process of using those insights for activation. And so at this stage, we're able to get deeper insight as well as automated modeling to build into activation workflows. So we can do a lot of automation here in order to be able to uncover things we wouldn't be able to, as well as being able to use those insights across our various different platforms. A good example here is something that I'm sure a lot of you have at least heard about of late, and that is value-based bidding within the Google ecosystem. And so these types of models can help a marketer understand what high-value actions are there on the website. And then using this automation, we can pass those insights into the ad platforms. And so smart bidding, some of the logic there is able to then start using that data and those predictive models and the data from those predictive models in order to automate and optimize the bidding process. So we can directly translate this into activities that we are doing for marketing and advertising. So kind of some examples of questions we can begin to start answering. And we can also start predicting how these answers might change moving forward in order to be much, much more efficient with all of our marketing spend. So we talked about it a little bit there for using it and using those insights that are generated. And so this is where, if we've done everything right, we've continued to build this process, we're to the point where we can actually start really realizing the value that we are deriving here. And so how can we use it? There's a few different ways. Number one is, I like to say, help your marketing technology help you. So again, going back to that conceptual kind of overview at the start of how the third-party cookies going away just blacks out. It removes that ability for our technologies that we have in use to provide us with things like attribution, to target users, all of that. So what those technologies are now reliant upon is us providing our first-party data to them. So this is where things like conversion APIs come in, where everybody wants you to send up your transactions, your conversions, along with persistent identifiers to things like Facebook, to things like TikTok, as well as the same concept with enhanced conversions for Google. We can also start to include offline data in the data that we are sending. Both we can execute on this through that server-side tag management or data distribution architecture, where we can have other data sources that are not just the website to be able to funnel in offline data. We can also upload offline data directly. This is also where the concept of alternative identifiers starts to come in. As we remove or lose that ability for the third-party cookie IDs to be able to join data sets together, alternative identifiers are being put forth by the industry as an alternative. So as a new key value that is consented, should be in every case, that can be used for joining those data sets. Similar, and even kind of building on top of those alternative identifiers, are also the uploading process for audience lists. So things like customer match, custom audiences. In addition to actually providing that first-party data to our third-party partners, we can also start to directly leverage the insights that we're generating ourselves from those data sets. So again, we talked about already the value-based bidding, customer lifetime value, segmenting users based upon that CLV analysis, and then being able to optimize our activities for our highest value segments, as well as doing things like propensity modeling in order to be able to optimize our bidding strategies. Final two areas here, using our first-party data with emerging technologies. I mentioned already identity resolution. Also building from there is data clean rooms, being able to combine our first-party data with someone else's first-party data to be able to get aggregated insights. And then it's also really important to note that our data is going to be extremely valuable, as well as this architecture is going to be really valuable for coming technologies such as Privacy Sandbox and specifically the Protected Audiences API. With that Protected Audiences API, one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that it completely changes the nature for how and when an individual needs to be placed within a group for targeting. So today, our audience creation is a process that happens after interactions take place. Someone buys something on the website, they're in our analytics system. We can then do analysis a couple of days later for all purchasers over the past week. We can build an audience for activation on that. With the Protected Audience API and with how this technology is evolving, you need to be able to define the interest group or define the audience group that that individual should be placed in real time, at the time of whatever their interaction is that is taking place. So in order to be really sophisticated with this, you're going to need to predefine those audiences. You need the predefined criteria or segmentation, and then you need to be able to calculate and determine if and when that individual should or could be placed within that audience, again, in real time at the time of the interaction. And so the first party data and these insights that we're generating from it becomes really critical for activation there. And then finally, we can follow the insights. I mentioned before things like our CLV analysis, but using that to segment our users, using that to be able to better understand who is doing what on our websites, and then optimizing for that with both the experience optimization as well as our media strategies. So those are our 5 ways that we can really focus on in order to be able to maximize the value of our first party data. We can start by optimizing that collection. So focusing on the privacy experience, collecting more from our individuals and from our consumers that we do have that trusting relationship with. We can control collection and distribution to be able to mitigate some of those compliance risks, as well as to be able to start funneling all of that data into our own owned first-party data warehouse. We can expand our conception of first-party data so that we can start to really focus on other data that's generated from platforms that we're investing in and really using that to be able to enhance our analysis. We can combine and integrate all that data together. Then we can start doing some more advanced modeling techniques, our own machine learning, our own AI models, our own automation to be able to extract insights. And then we can start to use those insights as well as the data that we're collecting for activation. So 5 kind of keys to be focusing on and 5 areas where we will certainly have some further content and webinars and information getting into some of the more nitty-gritty for each. So I know we did open up the poll data there. Just 2 quick questions just around what is it that you're thinking that you're doing the best at today, as well as what is it that you're going to want to be focusing on here moving forward, and then as well as question if we can help at all. While you all are answering those questions, I will open up the Q&A as well as the chat, see if there are any questions in there that we might be able to answer in the 10 minutes that we have remaining. First question in the Q&A, how do you know what you're dealing with from the server side and keep control of the data? Do you get these sort of cryptic request bodies with keys that don't make sense, or do you fully control what gets sent to the server and then to other platforms end to end? It's a wonderful question. As far as how the server-side data distribution is working, you are defining exactly the data that is sent to your server instance with something like server-side Google Tag Manager that I used in the example here today. Server-side Tag Manager leverages the GA4 data model. So if you already have GA4 set up on your website, that data, if you have that just collecting on the client side, is being sent up to a Google endpoint by the tag. You can basically just swap that out with your own server-side endpoint in order to begin streaming that data to your server-side GTM tag instance. From there, it's configuration within the server-side platform that's just mapping data based upon what those inputs are for those parameters, mapping them to other parameters that you are controlling, and then you're configuring those to be sent to your third-party partners that you are working with. So you do have complete visibility, you have complete control. There might be some instances where, hey, I don't know exactly what this parameter is that's coming in, but you do have control over that. So that could or should have been a design decision at some point. If it's not in use, wonderful, stop collecting it. Follow that principle of data minimization, and that will be super helpful. A question about if third parties don't have access to cookie IDs, how can they still do audience match? I mentioned 2 concepts there in the use it area. for, well, one concept, alternative identifiers. And so that is primarily how audience matching is happening now and then moving into the future. So alternative identifiers in the case of something like a, say, customer match upload to a Google Ads instance, where you're uploading a list of emails or consumers that you're wanting to target. Google on their end is, in this case, your alternative identifier would be the email or the hashed email address. Google is then matching that against their consented data set. Any of those individuals or users that they also have that same email for, matching is happening there. We also see this for, in the case of like an identity resolution platform, they're trying to expand what is considered that match surface. And so things like email, name, address, any kind of identifiers that they're able to collect, they're able to build that out in a identity graph or identity table, and then match upon any of those values or parameters that are present. So different organizations handle it in different ways, but matching is always having to happen with a key value that both you have as well as the partner has. Most often that is going to take the form of email or a hashed email, kind of in the environments and how the industry is shaping up as of now. A question about what is the role of brevity in privacy statements? Thinking about balancing transparency and completeness with brevity so as not to overwhelm users. I think it's an excellent point. There is certainly a balance there between, well, there's never a balance between transparency. We always want to be transparent, but there's a balance between providing enough information in order to be able to convey exactly what it is that is being done with the data and what that means for the consumer, as well as addressing our compliance requirements and balancing that with making it not overwhelming. So this is where I think if we can cut through a lot of the technical jargon, so many banners and experiences are talking about cookies. These cookies do this, third-party cookies, first-party cookies. Again, most users on the internet have no concept of what any of those technical aspects are. What data is being collected? Where is it going? How is it being used? What is that impact on the consumer? If we can concisely express that to the consumer, especially as most regulations do allow for kind of multi-layered approaches, so we can provide the critical information and then provide them the ability and opportunity to dive in and express more. I think that's the best way of striking the balance here moving forward. We have an example here for brands, publishers, or ad tech vendors that are effectively demonstrating transparency with their consumers on their data collection and distribution practices. I actually came across an excellent example of this a couple of days ago. I'll have to find that. I will get that to our marketing folks to send out in a follow-up. There's also an open source aggregation, I guess, of various different design principles related to this concept of transparency for privacy notices and for how to effectively convey information to a user. I'll find that link. We'll send that in the follow-ups, but that is a really, really good way of doing it. And it's an excellent example that I'm upset that I don't remember what it is, but we will send that out. And then the next question is, how do you envision the role of artificial intelligence and machine learning evolving in the field of digital advertising over the next few years? Certainly in the near term, it's in everyone's marketing material. So it is certainly something that is being focused on by the industry, especially anyone that's trying to sell a technology. I think, as we've talked about here, there are headwinds for how much information is able to be collected, as well as how we're able to integrate that information together. And that's where kind of ML AI, I think, falls in on the technology side. The partners that we're working with is that those types of technologies, those types of methods are able to derive insights from smaller data sets, spot patterns where maybe traditionally we haven't been able to. And that's going to be able to convey value on the platform or on the partner side. I think for us as marketers, with the first party data that we have, it is really getting into, how can we leverage the models that are available to us, lean on our data science folks for that art of matching various different models and being creative with the ways in which we are deriving insights from the information that we have. And I think as technology continues to accelerate in that area, it's going to give us more tools at our disposal in order to be able to get to deeper insights, deeper understanding of our consumers, which can then translate into, again, competitive advantage and optimizations across the board. Thank you all for joining, and be on the lookout for future webinars from InfoTrust. Look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you.